Nintendo is bringing the fight this generation with the Switch 2, so it's time to break down everything they announced about the hardware. In fact, let's just go ahead and take it out! Welcome to Mike Techs It Out. I'm Mike, and also I'm exhausted after watching that Switch 2 Direct. Can someone inform Nintendo that it's Wednesday? It's not a great day for a densely packed announcement event. Luckily, we're not going to talk about everything from the Direct, but we're going to be focusing on what they announced hardware-wise and, of course, the price. So if you followed my weekly news videos, there were a lot of leaks about the Switch 2 hardware ahead of time, but Nintendo did a surprisingly good job of keeping a lot of the details about the system secret. Like the display, for example, we knew it was going to be 7.9-inch 1080p display, but it also runs at 120 Hz with variable refresh rate, which surprised me because Nintendo, for the most part, has pretended frame rates don't exist. I mean, look at how Breath of the Wild ran on Switch when it launched. But with the Switch 2 having variable refresh rates, even games that run at lower refresh rates will still be smoother since the refresh rate can adjust to match the frame rate of the game, as long as the frame rate doesn't dip too far or below the range that VRR supports. It's not specified on Nintendo's page, but I'm guessing it'll probably be between 30 and 120 Hz. But either way, just hearing Nintendo say 120 frames per second for smoother gameplay, that threw me off a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, is this a Nintendo Direct or is this the PS5 Pro presentation? Now the Switch 2 is also going to see some improvements with the new dock. It's going to allow 4K 60Hz with HDR and up to 120Hz at 1080p or 1440p. I'm guessing they're not putting an HDMI 2.1 port on the system, which would have enabled 4K at 120Hz. But it is nice to have some high refresh rate options even when the system's docked. They also mentioned that Metroid Prime 4 Switch 2 Edition can run at 4K 60 or 1080p 120Hz. So they even got a game coming out this year that takes advantage of the high refresh rate. The one thing Nintendo didn't really get into is how they're going to achieve 4K when docked on these systems. We can assume they're going to use some kind of upscaling tech like DLSS. And to be honest, I didn't really expect them to talk about it because I think it would have been a little too far with the audience that they typically appeal to. The only thing they mentioned on the Switch 2 page on their site is that it has a significantly improved CPU and GPU that enables more detailed graphics and faster load times. But overall, I'm still pretty impressed with the new display and the output options that we're getting through the dock. Now, when it comes to the controllers, they did confirm that they are attaching via magnets as rumored, but they also confirmed that they're going to have the mouse functionality. They showed off a few short gameplay demos where you could see them using the controller as a mouse, but it felt gimmicky. But that's what Nintendo does. They probably felt like they needed a new gimmick for this system, and that's the mouse functionality this time around. Not saying that it's a bad thing, but I kind of feel like it's like 3D Rumble on the Switch 1. I feel like it'll rarely be used. While we're on the topic of the controller, another thing that leaked early on was that mysterious C button. Everyone was trying to figure out what it's for. Well, it turns out the C stands for chat. Yes, it's true. Nintendo is doing chat on the system this time, unlike the Switch where you had to use a separate mobile app. Nintendo's finally made it to 2005 with their online features, and I'm so proud of them. Alright, in all seriousness, they're launching the system with an optional camera you can buy to go along with the chat features, so you can do video chats as well. You can also see what other people are playing in the chat. And the camera quality from the demo, well, it was trash. But you know what? 2005 features come with 2005 camera quality, I guess. Now, I'm glad that they're adding the voice and video chat feature, but they spent way too much time on this. Like, we know how the feature works. We've known for the last couple of decades now. And speaking of the chat, they're also claiming that the built-in microphone will be better quality and the speakers will now support spatial audio. Now, I personally found spatial audio on stereo speakers to not be great, so I'm not sure how well it will work, but hopefully the speakers will still be improved over the Switch 1. Another semi-mystery, to me at least, was what was the deal with the second USB-C port on the top of the system. Well, Nintendo did confirm that it is for charging, so that way if you're using the kickstand, you can actually charge the device, which makes sense. I didn't think about it because I never used the kickstand on the Switch except for now to display it. But with the larger screen and the improved kickstand that they borrowed from the Switch OLED, I can see that being more of a thing now. It's also just nice to have different options for charging it depending on how you're holding it while you're playing the system. A system that will now come with 256 gigabytes of internal storage. Now, that number still isn't great, especially because we're going to be dealing with larger games with them going up to 4K, but we were dealing with 32 gigs on the original Switch and 64 gigs on the OLED, so at least it's a lot more than that. But outside of having more, it's also going to be faster memory as they're no longer using eMMC memory, and they've upgraded to UFS for their internal storage. Now, we should see a pretty big difference as eMMC maxes out at around 400 megabytes per second versus UFS, which can go up to 4200 megabytes per second. That is if they're using UFS 4.0, which isn't specified. But either way, it'll still be quite a bit faster than the original Switch's memory, which I'm sure is contributing to the faster load times that they mentioned on their website when they were talking about the CPU and GPU. Now, of course, since they're using faster internal storage, you'll also need to buy faster external storage if you want to expand the memory. So they announced that the Switch 2 will only be compatible with micro SD express cards, which can go up to 2 terabytes, but they are unfortunately more expensive. But like regular micro SD cards, I'm sure they'll come down in price over time. And at least they're still using a standard SD card instead of anything proprietary. Now, the Micro Express SD card thing actually did leak a couple of months ago when a GameStop employee showed Micro SD Express cards in inventory for Switch 2, so this was kind of expected to happen. Just like another rumor that came out recently that the Switch 2 is going to support Wi-Fi 6, which has also been confirmed. It's not the latest standard, but like I said at the time, most people probably don't have a Wi-Fi 6E or 7 router at this point, so it doesn't really matter. It would have just been a nice thing to have as far as future-proofing the console. The other hardware on the Switch 2 is kind of what we expect. It's still going to have gyroscopes in the controllers, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and Bluetooth, which I didn't specify which version it is, but hopefully it's better than the Switch 1. The thing that's not better than the Switch 1, of course, is the price. So the Switch 2 is landing at $450, which personally, for the improvements, I can live with the price. I mean, the Switch OLED was $350, and even without having the OLED screen, the Switch 2 still has a bigger screen that's higher resolution, high refresh rate, and of course the console is just more powerful overall. I think $400 would have made sense, but of course there are other factors going on in the US like tariffs, which likely contributed to a higher price. And speaking of that, the game prices also seem to be going up as well. So the system is launching on June 5th, which I hadn't mentioned by the way, that's the release date. But anyway, it's launching on June 5th with Mario Kart World, and that game by itself is $80. Of course, if you get it with the bundle with the system, it's $500 altogether, which makes the game $50. But we hadn't really seen Microsoft or Sony go that high price-wise yet, so it was a bit surprising. Now, Donkey Kong Bonanza is listed for $70, so I'm not sure if this pricing is going to be across the board. But yeah, it looks like we may see Switch 2 games get more expensive. But I will say overall, even with the price increases, I am overall impressed with the Switch 2. Nintendo not only had to beat the Switch 1, but they got to beat the Steam Deck now too, and the handheld PC market that they kind of jump-started. We saw a boom with the handheld PCs, and the Steam Deck does have a model that's cheaper than the Switch 2, so they really had to come out swinging when it comes to the features to compete against something like this. And Nintendo has somehow pulled it off in a weird way. Like, they have the high refresh rate screen with VRR, comparable storage. I mean, they are lacking in that department somewhat, but they're closer to what you get on a handheld PC now. The dock that can output 4K 60 with HDR and 1080p or 1440p at 120. And last but not least, a CPU and GPU that was actually made in the last decade. It's actually brought third-party developers back to Nintendo. One of the big games on Steam Deck when it launched was Elden Ring, and there was no way in hell it was going to run on a Switch, but it's actually coming to Switch 2. And so with Cyberpunk and Final Fantasy VII Remake integrated, games that people were playing on their Steam Deck and other PC handhelds but not able to enjoy on Switch. Now, of course, the system hasn't launched yet, so we don't know what AAA games will launch on the Switch 2 in the future, but it's looking better for Nintendo as far as third parties than it's looked in a long time. So to summarize, the Switch 2 is launching on June 5th for $450, with pre-orders starting on April 9th, because I forgot to mention that earlier too. And it's going to have a 7.9-inch 1080p 120Hz screen with a variable refresh rate. It's actually going to support 4K, HDR, and high refresh rates docked at lower resolutions, of course. And overall, I'm pretty excited for it. It feels like Nintendo is finally catching up with the other consoles and handhelds on the market when it comes to the features, and they're still offering something unique with their first-party games, the controller features, and the retro library via the Nintendo Switch Online subscription, which will now include GameCube games on the Switch 2. But let me know in the comments how you feel about the Switch 2. What did you think of the presentation? Was there anything you were expecting from Nintendo that they didn't show? Again, let me know down below. And if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell notification button thing to be notified when I drop a video or a live stream. And always do at least 2 things at the same time.